I'm really glad that I studied anthropology because I think that much of the work that I have done with the fundamentalist communities, in many ways, was sort of an anthropologic evaluation of these communities. I was born in Salt Lake City. After my high school, went to Stanford, then started working in news radio and television, and then went back and got a master's degree in journalism at Columbia. Got a job out of the blue to go to New York and work for a TV show called A Current Affair. We were the sort of the avant-garde, the front force of tabloid television and the invasion of tabloid. Worked with those guys, Maury Povich, for nearly a decade, and then ended up here in Phoenix when I was about, my wife and I were ready to raise a family, and I've been here for 30 years. You know, in many ways, it's looking at a group of people as sort of a living organism, and how does a culture, a society, a community survive and sustain itself? What are the mores? What are the traditions? What are the things they need to basically keep not just the individual, but the community and society as an entity and an organism moving forward? In many ways, the FLDS and many of the fundamentalist communities, you know, really it became a classic, I think, petri dish for an anthropological evaluation. How do they sustain themselves, this large group? You know, and it turns out it involved kicking young boys out and depriving the young women of really any opportunities. You understand this sort of social mechanisms, the architecture that is in place to keep a community moving forward. The FLDS are a fundamentalist group that is, you know, has the same sort of theology as the mainstream Mormons, but broke off many years ago when over the issue of plural marriage. The FLDS community, situated for many years in the twin border towns of Hilldale, Utah, and Colorado City, they certainly, I think, became the most open and, you know, clear-cut cult rule of a community that was run by a prophet. And they had a police force, and they had the two dusty little hideouts that polygamous renegades went to many years ago, morphed into these two municipalities that had mayors and had utilities, and they were all run by one man, Warren Jeffs. And it was a bad situation, and it went on for many years. Even before Warren, with his father and the man before him, I spent much of my career sort of documenting the crimes within this community. And, you know, it really was a pursuit on behalf of a couple of journalists and really a handful of brave women who were out raising hell early on. And it was that force that forced law enforcement to act. Starting in basically the 1950s, and it morphed into an increasingly bad situation with younger and younger girls being forced into marriages, more and more teenage boys being forced out, more and more just sort of flagrant criminality and sexual misconduct on the part of the important men. And the women who were the activists and those of us who sort of got involved and knew the story, you know, first knew it because of our own histories, I think started following this. And it really took just sort of uncovering one, you know, criminal man and his behavior, exposing it, dragging him into the public eye, and forcing law enforcement to do anything. And we got after some of the other guys, lower hanging fruit, men in the community, and it led to Warren. I give most of the credit to the brave women who got out and risked everything. I was just doing my damn job. The public got pissed off, and they started to demand action. Cops felt at politicians, but it was a slow burn, and it took way too many of these cases to finally get somebody to do anything. But at the end of the day, you ask, Warren Jeffs is in prison and he's been incarcerated 20 years this year. So we're celebrating, for me, it is the 20th anniversary of helping chasen Warren Jeffs' ass into a Texas penitentiary. I'm very proud of that. in most of these cases, covering crime for 50 years, usually they're not that complicated. And Epstein is exactly what it appears to be. You know, this guy was just a trafficker at sort of the highest flying end of the spectrum and had all these clients. And they included all the guys that are in the news, you know? And there's no bullshit about that. And they can sit around and try to obfuscate and do anything they want forever. But you know what? And they may well be successful, but it's bullshit. And I've covered enough of these. You know, there's not, the MO is pretty, control of women, the trafficking of women. I see parallels in whether it is Jeffrey Epstein or Warren Jeffs or the latest guy that I have now been following for a number of years, a man named Samuel Bateman, who was sort of an offshoot of Jeffs, amassed nearly 24 women and girls and exploited them in the most overt fashion up in Colorado City over a 3-year period, and nobody did a damn thing. Just to give you a quick history, it's Christmas time 2021, now what, 5 years ago. I'm retired. One of the reasons I retired from television news is because after decades of covering the child predation inside these communities, I was sort of burned out. I retired and really thought, if I never go back to Colorado City or Hilldale or have to deal with any of Warren's followers ever again, that's okay by me. But I'm sitting on this very patio out here one night, and I get a phone call from a man who says, I know this is going to sound strange. I looked at the area code, and I could tell that it was from somebody from Colorado City. And I looked at it, I thought, do I really want to answer that call? Keeps ringing, I'm curious. I answered the phone call, and a man who I've never met before says, hi, my name is Samuel Bateman. I know this is going to sound strange, but God has instructed me to meet Mike Watkiss and the Queen of England. Now, I would have hung up on it, but he gave me so now I'm hooked. I'm now at least, okay, this guy may be crazy, but I'm amused. It turns out he is a follower. He tells me he's a follower of Warren Jeffs, and that he really has been given some revelation by God that he wants to meet Mike Watkiss. The last thing I know, Warren Jeffs still had an active hit out on me from his prison cell. So I'm just a little skeptical. I'm thinking, why is it you're a follower of Warren Jeffs? Why do you want to meet me? Oh, it's nothing like that. I don't just want to meet you. It's all good. And so I flatly say no. Say I'm not interested. He calls me back. Over the course of several days, I get several calls from this guy, and finally he sort of wears me down, and I'm now thinking, I should meet this guy just because I need to get eyes on him, because he seems like he's going to force a meeting with me whether I want it or not. All this to say, I think I'm going to meet a guy, and suddenly van loads of women and girls load up, and they start piling out in the prairie dresses. And now I'm thinking, from my experience, I'm now in the middle of a crime scene. Because, I know exactly what these girls, they're little girls holding babies. I now don't want to scare the young women and girls. I'm mortified. Honestly, I'm mortified. I'm just sick to my stomach, and I'm thinking, do I grab this guy by the throat? And I'm thinking, I'm going to play this out. I know we're going to shoot video. As soon as I get home, I'm going to call the cops. The reason he called this together, this meeting, he wanted these women to sing me these FLDS hymns, beautifully sung. They were lovely girls and women, but the bottom line is they're in the dresses, they're in the hair, and and I can see they're completely at the beck and call of this guy. I'm horrified. We pack, say goodbye. I go home and immediately get edified. I talk to sources who this guy is, and apparently he'd been amassing women and girls and flagrantly being sort of a red flag up there that things were up, and nobody had done anything. So I'm now getting in on the story at this point. I call the FBI and say, if you're not looking at this guy, you sure as hell should be. And I've had a long history with those guys. Oh yeah, we'll get somebody out to see you. Some other people told me, don't do anything. The law enforcement's going to, you'll wreck the thing. So honestly, I thought, last thing I want to do is damage these girls. But I made 2 overtures to the FBI saying, I've got video and pictures of and it turns out they ultimately got busted after months of the FBI not doing anything because they got pulled over in a traffic stop. Not because they were being investigated, just because they got lucky. When he was on the run on the FBI's Most Wanted, and this is my history goes back with the FBI for a long way, and they ended up, it was nice. They flew me back to Washington and gave me a big award. I think because of my efforts to expose Warren and get him on the FBI's Most Wanted list and busted. And, Robert Mueller, the then director, gave me a big award. So I've had a long-standing history with the FBI, and that's why I was hoping that they'd be a little more proactive. I'm not just some guy calling from a phone booth. But again, they did nothing in regards to Bateman. Oh, so anyhow, Warren's on the run back in those days when he was on the FBI's Most Wanted list, and he was bouncing around between safe houses and going to Disney World and doing all kinds of crazy things with a brother and one of his young wives. While he's doing this, he makes a stop in Texas, that big compound where the big white temple was built, the Yearning for Zion compound where he moved after he lost control, after we sort of chased him out of Colorado City. He thought, if I go build a big fortress down in Texas and put a wall up, I'll keep everybody out. Well, that did take long for the Texas Rangers to get probable cause in and go in and find out that he's been raping little girls in there and get all kinds of evidence that got him convicted in Texas. Again, too many parts to the story. But while he was on the run, he was given one of his wacky sermons, and he had one of his wives. He's such an egomaniacal, crazy man. He had a wife recording everything he said, everything he did. Warren ate a pancake. I mean, literally crazy stuff. But every word he ever uttered was put down and transcribed. And during one of his wacky sermons, he called down God's wrath on murderous, adulterous, and corrupt Mike Watkiss and another police friend of mine, because we were horrible men and we had killed the innocent, and he encouraged his followers to take God's wrath out on us. I think in Warren's flowery talk, that's like, hey, put a hit on this guy. I thought it was, and that's one of the things, whatever awards I may have been given over the years, the Warren that I got on Warren's hit list is really the thing for which I am most proud. I've clearly been on the fundamentalist Mormon communities, but I've covered, the horrible scandal and crises in the Catholic Church where, dozens, hundreds of young men were abused over many years here in Phoenix. Look, it ain't just the Mormons and it ain't just the Catholics. And the faithful don't want to hear this, like the faithful Mormons don't want to hear those stories. But, this was a hotbed for that behavior. And the bishop, Thomas O'Brien, was up to his eyeballs in protecting these guys. The organization that represented the young men in the church that were coming out was becoming active, and there were a number of people speaking in their behalf. But Tommy O'Brien, they called them Tommy's boys. There were a lot of priests from all over the country that had some problems. They ended up sort of in his domain because apparently that's where they could go and be safe. I remember sitting in the news conferences of state officials demanded some sort of major financial offering by the church to take care of the victims, and it was all settled, but it was millions and millions of dollars. When it was basically, you had 3 local channels, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and if you were lucky, you maybe had a PBS channel. That wasn't the American landscape that I grew up in, and black and white television is really when I was a little kid. So it has changed so epically on so many levels. I have a daughter who's a TV news reporter in Texas right now, basically doing what I do, but her job is so much harder because I had to feed a 5, 6, and maybe a 10 o'clock newscast. They got to feed a nonstop internet. They have to, all of the platforms that now have many of them I still don't know, and just the fragmentation of the media and how now we're all basically beholden to just whoever is telling what our tribe wants to believe. So that never existed. Again, you had Walter Cronkite, you had David Brinkley and Chet, whatever, and those guys reading you the news and telling you that's the way it was. And clearly the internet has been the great liberator of voices. It's terrific. The democratization of communication. asshole with a camera is now, an internet star and is a broadcaster. But there are dangers to that because many of them are assholes, just, and reckless and silly. But that's the way of the world. And, you either get with the flow or you get run over it. And that is the media landscape, and it's tough to navigate. I just thought there was some fundamental ethos, always telling the truth about, being a reporter. And the truth, again, there's nuance to it, there's shades to it, but facts are facts. And and I don't know if maybe that is an old-fashioned ethos, and the older I get, I think it is. And a couple of the major networks have already thrown in the towel. They literally within just the last few days, it seems, have flipped the switch, and they're no longer in the pursuit of the truth. Yeah, I think it's a scary time to be telling the truth. I don't know, one of the great writers has said, when truth becomes the enemy, I mean, people who are honest, you're in trouble. It's a threatened species. And so, yeah, I'm not one that's going to fill your audience full of optimism. I'm still hopeful that there is a tomorrow and things will get better. But clearly, all of the issues talking about the fragmentation of our nation right now and the undermining of truth and honesty and any sort of civil and civic dialogue, those things seem to be something of the past. I don't have any idea how you navigate through the disinformation, the just out lies, the propagandization. We have, other nations, hostile nations influencing much of this social media. And again, I don't even know what half of these goddamn platforms are because I don't go on them anymore. I'm aged out of that shit. But clearly the world, it gets all of its information. And, you got Russians and Chinese and other, foreign agents who are actively involved in this. You've got internal people who have their insane extremist views, whatever they may be, who are doing this. You wish for that more perfect union, and I've been around. I'm a sappy old man at this point. I've been through the heartbreak of Vietnam and and born in the '50s now, and it's just looking back on the arc. You want the time when America was looked as the beacon of something better. Despite all of our foibles, the horrible treatment of indigenous people, the horrible treatment of black people, the horrible treatment of damn near every immigrant group who's come through here. But somewhere along the line, we still sort of pulled it together for some greater union, pulling for some better ideal. And that really seems to have been sullied. Just a wealth of memories, having been, traveled with Michael Jackson, been on the scene when the O.J. Simpson murder trial broke, been in Biloxi, Mississippi, which had been washed off the face of the earth with Hurricane Katrina, being at Ground Zero shortly after the towers came down. These are all, and then memories with people, memories of the father and son in a covered wagon on the side of a freeway one time we pulled over and did a story. These are the moments that stay with me, and I'm blessed to have had, again, the life. I feel like I've had the adventures and been ringside for the adventures of 12 men. And I just pinch myself sometimes when I think, I was so lucky. I just have this front row seat for a lot of history, whether it's being in the throes of a riot. Still, it's sort of invigorating. It's, covering just these cataclysmic wildfires all over Southern California and all over this beautiful state, and being right in the front lines before they kept you way back and they cordoned it off, back in the days when I could really get in the teeth of big stories. And I think there's greater access to when I was doing that. Law enforcement, everybody sets up the perimeter a long way away from most stories these days. And I was lucky enough to be one of those guys that chased the scanner and worked with a cameraman. We were often there before the cops got there. Just because I'm an old man and the time has passed me by, if you want to be in this business, you got to be on the wave. You got to be on the edge, riding, surfing the wave of the tsunami that is media, and if you want to stay relevant, and all of those things. That's the challenge, and fortunately for an old man like me, I don't have to make that decision. But it's daunting, and and again, we glorify a lot of idiots, and they become very famous and very powerful and influential. But there are some smart people out there who are on the airwaves and are popular. I don't even want to listen to these guys. I think most of it's bullshit, and again, they don't. It does not. It's not speaking to my demographic.
Well, yeah, I mean, we were talking a little bit about Joe Rogan, or not singling out too much, but a man who's an MMA fighter and a comedian is qualified to talk about MMA and comedy, but he's giving advice on public health and vaccines. It's like, what in his background would make you think he's an authority?
Not a damn thing.
Not a damn thing. Yeah. And I think that's where, like, journalists, would introduce doctor or interview doctor so and so, or some scientist. That's not a requirement.
The loudest voice is not always telling the truth.
Yeah.
Is usually not telling the truth.